Good day, students. Welcome to mathgoodsurf.com. In this clip, we're going to be going over more examples on how to find the inverse of functions. The strategy that we are going to be employing to find the inverse of functions in this clip are as follows. Number one, step one, we're going to switch the x with f inverse of x and f of x with x. Okay, in step one, what we're basically doing is switching the output with the inputs and the inputs with the inverse of the outputs. Okay, after carrying out the switch, what we'll do is we're going to solve the equation for f inverse of x, and the resulting equation will be what our inverse is equal to. The instructions for the examples that we're going to be doing are as follows. We are to find the inverse of each function. Find the inverse of each function. Okay, so for problem number one, what if we had the function f of x equals negative 1 divided by x plus 2 plus 2. Okay, so how do we find the what is the inverse of this function? Step one, we're going to switch f of x with x and x with the inverse of x. Okay, let me rewrite the function again. So we have f of x equals negative 1 over x plus 2 plus 2. Okay, I have my steps enumerated here, so if you get confused with any of the steps, feel free to post a comment indicating what number represents the line that you're confused with. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and carry out our switch. We're going to replace f of x with x. That equals negative 1 over. Now instead of x, we're going to replace that with f inverse of x. So the input now becomes the inverse of the output, plus 2 plus 2. Okay, so that's the switch. Now we're going to solve for f inverse of x. First step that we'll do is we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. We'll then reciprocate both sides of the equation to have the inverse upstairs. We'll subtract, we can multiply by negative 1, and then we'll subtract 2 to finish off the problem. Alright, so let's start off by subtracting 2 from both sides of the equation. On the right side, positive 2 minus 2 add up to 0. So we're left with, I'm going to switch my equation around, we're left with negative. I can attach the negative with the numerator. Negative 1 divided by f inverse of x plus 2 equals, on the right side of the equation, we'll have x minus 2. Now, the inverse of f that I'm solving for, f to the negative 1 of x, is in the denominator. Well, that's a problem. Well, what I can do, I can cross multiply, or I can express both sides of my equation as a fraction, and then I can proceed to reciprocate both sides. Okay, so I can reciprocate this side of my equation and reciprocate this side of my equation also. Now what does that yield? That gives us f inverse of x plus 2 divided by negative 1 equals, we'll reciprocate the right side also, 1 divided by x minus 2. Now we need to just get rid of the negative 1 in the denominator and the plus 2. First step is to multiply both sides by negative 1. Let's write that again. So multiply this side by negative 1, and then this side of the equation by negative 1. On the left side, we'll have the inverse of f plus 2 equals, on the right side, negative 1 divided by x minus 2. We achieve this by writing negative 1 as a fraction, we multiply negative 1 times 1, it's negative 1, and then 1 times x minus 2 is x minus 2. Last but not the least, we'll subtract 2 from both sides of the equation. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll subtract 2, and our final answer, the inverse, will be f to the negative 1 of x equals plus 2 minus 2 add up to 0. So that equals negative 1 over x minus 2 minus 2. Okay, so this function is the inverse of f of x. All right, let's try another example. Now, what if we had to find the inverse of the function f of x equals x plus 1 to the 5th power minus 3. Okay, so we're going to be following the same strategy listed here. So this is number 2. Okay, so let's start with the function. I'm just going to rewrite the problem here for line 1. Step number 1 is to switch the f of x with x. So let's call this x. That equals, and then we're going to switch x with the inverse of f, okay? So let me just make that. So this equals, instead of x, we have f inverse of x plus 1, and this entire thing raised to the 5th power minus 3. Okay, so what we have just carried out now is a switch. Now what we'll do next is we're going to solve for the inverse of f, and that will be our inverse. To accomplish that, we'll first of all add 3 to both sides, take the 5th root to get rid of this power, and then subtract 1. Alright, so let's go ahead and do it. We're going to start off by adding 3 to both sides of the equation. On the right side, this adds up to 0, so let me switch the equation around. We have f inverse of x plus 1 raised to the 5th power is equal to x plus 3. Okay? Now let's address the 5th power. The opposite, or the inverse of the 5th power, or raising an expression to the 5th power, is taking the 5th root. Okay, so we're going to take the 5th root of both sides of our equation. The 5th root is just the square root bar with the 5 there. Since these two functions are inverses or opposites on the left side, they both cancel each other out. So we are left with the inverse of f of x plus 1 equals the 5th root of x plus 3. To finish this problem off, we'll simply subtract 1 from both sides of our equation to have f inverse of x isolated. Okay, so if we carry out the subtraction, we're going to have f inverse of x equals the 5th root of x plus 3 minus 1. Okay, so this basically this function is the inverse of f of x. Alright, let's take a look at problem number 3. What if we were to find the inverse of the function f of x equals the 3rd root of x plus 3 over 2? How will we go about doing this? Let's go ahead and rewrite the function again. F of x equals the 3rd root of x plus 3 over 2. First step, as indicated in our strategy guide here, we're going to switch f of x with x and x with the inverse of f. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We have x equals the 3rd root of, we are going to replace x with f inverse of x plus 3. and this entire numerator divided by 2. Now to get f inverse of x isolated, we're going to get rid of the third root first by raising both sides to the third power, and then we'll get rid of the 2 in the denominator and then the 3 that's being added on to the inverse. Okay, so let's proceed with the first step, which is raising both sides of the equation to the third power. Why? Because the third power is the inverse of the third root. Now let's go ahead and reduce the right side. This third power and the third root would cancel each other out. So let's switch the equation around. We have the inverse of f of x plus 3 divided by 2 is equal to x to the third. Now we're going to proceed to address these 2 in the denominator. We'll multiply both sides by 2. And that leaves us with f inverse of x plus 3. On the left side, this 2 and this 2 in the denominator both divide out to 1. So we're left with the numerator, f inverse of x plus 3 equals 2x to the third. To finish this problem off, we'll simply subtract 3 from both sides of our equation to get f inverse of x isolated, and that will be our solution. So we have f inverse of x plus 3 minus 3 cancel out equals 2x to the third minus 3. And this is your final result, the inverse of f of x. Alright, let's take a look at problem 4, the last question in this installment. Now what if we have the function g of x equals negative 6 minus the third root of 4x divided by 2. Now what if we're to find the inverse of this function? Let's start by carrying out our switch. Now we're dealing with g as opposed to f, so we'll just follow the same procedure but use g instead of f. Okay, so we're going to switch g of x, the output, with x. Let's color code that. Replace that with x, and then that equals, on the right side we are only going to change x. Just x alone gets changed to g inverse of x. Okay, so that equals negative 6 minus the third root of 4 times what? 4 times g inverse of x. Alright? And then this entire expression on the right divided by 2. Okay, so how do we carry out the next step, which is to solve for g inverse of x? To solve for g inverse of x, we'll simply get rid of the 2 in the denominator, the negative 6, this minus sign right here, the third root, and then the 4 in that order to get g inverse of x isolated. So let's start by getting rid of the 2 in the denominator, multiply both sides by 2. On the right side, these two 2's divide out. Let's switch our equation around. We have negative 6 minus the third root of 4 times g inverse of x. That equals 2x on the right side, which was on the left side of line 1. Now let's get rid of this 6 to accomplish that. Actually, negative 6. We will add 6 to both sides of our equation. That yields negative the third root of 4 times g inverse of x. That equals 2x plus 6. Okay, now this negative, we can easily address that by multiplying both sides of our equation by negative 1 or by dividing by -1, we accomplish the same goal. Okay, so let's just divide by -1. Divide everything by -1 to address the negativity on the left side of our equation. So if we do that, we are going to have the third root of 4 times g inverse of x equals, now what happens when you divide positive 2x by negative? The sign changes to -2x. Same applies to positive 6 divided by -1. The sign changes also to -6. Now we are going to proceed to take the third power of both sides. Why the third power? Because that is the inverse of the third root. So we'll raise both sides of our equation to the third power. On the left side, notice what happens. The third power and the third root are inverses, so they cancel each other out. And we're left with 4g inverse of x equals -2x minus 6 raised to the third power. The last step is just to divide both sides of the equation by 4. Let's go ahead and do that. Divide by 4, divide by 4, and that yields the inverse, g inverse of x equals -2x minus 6 to the third power divided by 4. Okay? Now this is a good answer, but we can simplify further. Okay, so this is an acceptable answer. If we want to simplify further, what we'll do to the right side is factor out -2. So we'll have g inverse of x equals, now if I factor out -2 from these two numbers, I'll end up with -2 to the third power, okay, times x plus, if I take out -2 from positive -6, it becomes +3. Okay, raised to the third power. So that's by factoring out -2 from these two and then inserting that power to it. Okay, and then this divided by 4. And then let's simplify a little bit more. We have g inverse of x equals, now what is -2 to the third power? It's -8 times x plus 3 to the third power divided by 4. Okay, that divided by 4. And then our final form will be accomplished by dividing 4 into the denominator, which yields 1, and into the numerator, which yields 2. And our inverse, g inverse of x, is -2 times x plus 3 raised to the third power. Okay, so this is the answer in the completely simplified form. This answer is also good, but it could be simplified further to arrive at the result in line 10. Okay, so this is the inverse of g of x. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this presentation. We really appreciate it. If you found this tutorial beneficial to you, please give us a thumbs up. We value your positive feedback. Do not forget to subscribe for updates to other cool tutorials such as this. If you have any questions on any part of this presentation, just place your comments below and also include the timestamp as to where your confusion is at. More clips can be found on mathcodeserve.com. Thanks again for watching and have a wonderful day.